We're going to begin our tour today with a land acknowledgement. We understand that the land upon which we are walking and learning about is part of the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We know that the history which we are speaking about today took place following the arrival of European colonizers, and that this land contains a much longer and richer history than the topics discussed here today, which speak mainly of architectural developments over the last 200 years. We would like to acknowledge our limited knowledge of the full history and heritage of this land. Thank you for joining us. The title of our tour today is Walking Through History, Social and Humanitarian Evolution in Downtown Toronto. The theme looks at how we reframe the infrastructure to reflect our city's changing values. Toronto has changed a lot over time. Once centered on industrial development, economic power, and concrete infrastructure, but today, Toronto's dynamic new infrastructure is prioritizing spaces for community, mental health, and art. In this walking tour, we will see how architects are breathing new life into our heritage sites, creating spaces where people can come together. Our theme is inspired by the 2025 Canadian Association of Leisure Studies Conference, Reframing Togetherness in a Changing World. Echoing this theme, we will explore how infrastructure can foster inclusivity, build bridges, and strengthen communities. As we explore a small piece of Toronto, we will show how the city has shifted from work to wellness, and from buildings to belonging. The message today is that as our values evolve, so must our cities. Our walking tour includes 8 meaningful heritage and cultural sites in Toronto. These sites reflect the city's evolution from an industrial center to a community that values wellness, public space, and human connection while honoring its past. Let's get started. Follow me to our first stop, a small building with a surprisingly big role in the city's early civic life. Welcome everyone to the first stop on our tour. We're kicking things off right where communication in Toronto quite literally began, Toronto's first post office. Don't let its tidy brickwork and modest footprint fool you. This building has seen nearly 2 centuries of change, and it tells us a lot about how the city has evolved. Built in 1834, this is the oldest surviving post office in the city, and a proud National Historic Site of Canada. At the time, Toronto had just officially become a city, and the post office ran as a department of the British Royal Mail. Just 3 years after opening in 1837, the post office shut down and the building was repurposed. It kind of drifted through other uses for more than a century until it was lovingly restored and reopened in 1983, not just as a museum, but as a fully functioning post office once again. Today, it's operated by the Town of York Historical Society, keeping alive the stories of early Toronto, back when this area was still known as the Town of York. The architecture is late Georgian style, as demonstrated by the symmetrical facade, the simple elegance of the design. No showy columns or towers here, just solid proportions and quiet dignity, the kind that says, you can trust us with your mail. What's especially fascinating is how this little post office didn't stay isolated. Over the years, it became physically and functionally linked to the buildings on this block. From 1871 to 1916, the entire row was repurposed as a Catholic boys' school, known as the De La Salle Institute. And here's a cool architectural footnote. Some of the most respected names in Canadian design left their mark right here. John G. Howard, who designed the Bank of Upper Canada's second home, and Henry Langley, who built the De La Salle School building itself. So this block is more than just a stretch of preserved history. It's sort of a palimpsest of Toronto's evolving identity. From Royal Mail to rebellion, from education to preservation, it reflects how we've reframed and reused infrastructure to meet new values over time. And that's really the heart of this tour. How do we, as a city, choose what to preserve, what to adapt, and what to let go of? Buildings like this one remind us that infrastructure isn't just about bricks and mortar, it's about what we value at any given time in our story. Now let's head to the next stop to continue exploring the history of our city's architecture. Now let's head to the next stop to continue exploring the history of our city's architecture. Our next stop brings us to the southeast corner of King and George, a corner that quietly holds over 2 centuries of Toronto's history, even if it's now home to Royal LePage real estate. But trust me, the stories this site could tell go far beyond buying and selling condos. Let's rewind all the way back to June 1st, 1807. That's when Reverend George Oakle Stewart opened the very first public school in York, right here on this site. If you can imagine a small 1-story stone building attached to a modest frame house, nothing fancy, but incredibly important. It marked the beginning of public education in the city we now call Toronto. The school didn't stay here long. It bounced around for a bit. By 1813, classes were being held in a barn at Yonge and King. And then in 1816, the old Blue School was built over on Church Street. But this corner kept evolving. The building you see now was constructed in 1879, and it functioned as the Little York Hotel. Between the history of education and hotels, it's almost as if George Brown's hospitality program were destined for this very same area. Today, the building is a designated heritage property under the Ontario Heritage Act, and while it now houses Royal LePage, one of Canada's oldest real estate firms, its bones still tell the story of early education and community development. This stop is a perfect example of what we're exploring today, how our buildings and infrastructure evolve with our values. What started as a site for learning became a space for lodging, and is now a center for business. But each layer adds richness to the city's identity. So while this building might blend in now, it stands as a quiet monument to Toronto's first steps toward public education, and a reminder that every corner of the city has a story. Let's head on to our next stop and see how those stories continue to evolve. Welcome to St. James Cathedral, one of the oldest and most iconic churches in Toronto. Completed in 1853, this Anglican Gothic revival church stands as a testament to the city's early architectural ambition and spiritual life. The cathedral's tower and spire, completed in 1875, rise to an impressive 305 feet, or 93 meters, the tallest in Canada and the second tallest in North America to this day. As you look up, notice how it still punctuates the skyline, a vertical symbol of continuity in a city that's constantly evolving. Its height was no accident. It was designed to be seen from all directions, reflecting both the grandeur of its faith and its importance in the urban fabric. In the tower are 5 bells. Originally, one of those bells served as a fire bell for the city, warning residents in times of danger. It was one of the most reliable forms of public alert in the 19th century, and a solemn echo of the devastation this community once endured. These bells are part of the city's auditory history, ringing out across generations, marking not just hours, but also moments of public life and memory. St. James is still an active place of worship. Its professional 18-voice choir performs at Sunday Eucharist and evensong services, filling this sacred space with music that transcends time. And for those who can't be here in person, the cathedral now streams services on YouTube, blending the 19th century architecture with 21st century accessibility. But this cathedral also has a resilient past, shaped by destruction and rebirth. Its earlier versions were far more modest. Originally a wooden church, it served as a hospital during the 1832 cholera epidemic and was damaged in the rebellion of 1837. One of its earliest rectors, George Oakle Stewart, was a central figure during this period. Not only was he a religious leader, but he was also an educator and civic organizer. You'll remember him from our earlier stop at the Home District School. He was instrumental in shaping both the city's spiritual and intellectual life. Then came the Great Fire of 1849. Sparked just blocks from here, the blaze tore through the city's commercial core, and the then-standing St. James Church was among over 100 buildings lost. It was a devastating moment for the city, but also a turning point. In response, the community rebuilt bigger and bolder, and out of the ashes rose the Gothic Revival Cathedral that we see today, opened for services just 4 years later in 1853. So in many ways, St. James Cathedral embodies the very theme of our tour, revitalization. This building, shaped by fires, epidemics, war, and even looting, is not just a relic of the past, it's a symbol of how Toronto continues to preserve, repurpose, and reimagine its most historic spaces to reflect the values of each new generation. So take a moment to appreciate how St. James Cathedral embodies the very spirit of this tour, how infrastructure and architecture are reframed over time to reflect the city's values of inclusion, memory, and transformation. Now let's keep moving on to our next stop, another excellent example of a building which has been adapted and kept alive through preservation. Here we are at the iconic Omni King Edward Hotel, affectionately known as the King Eddie. And as you can see, it still radiates elegance more than a century after it opened its doors in 1903. This was Toronto's first palace hotel, launched during the Edwardian era to rival the grandeur of international cities like London and New York. It was more than just a luxury getaway. It was a declaration of Toronto's aspirations, signaling that the city was ready to join the ranks of the world's cultural capitals. The hotel's first guest was its primary financier, none other than George Gooderham of the Gooderham and Worts Company, responsible for the establishment and history behind our beloved distillery district. The hotel was an engineering marvel of its time, said to be absolutely fireproof, as advertised, and came complete with private baths, telephones in the rooms, and even an elevator. Not bad for 1903. But let's look a little closer, because like many stops on this tour, this building tells a deeper story about transformation. The hotel has undergone major changes over the decades. The Roaring Twenties brought an 18-story tower and the legendary Crystal Ballroom, a glamorous space that recently underwent a $6.5 million restoration, reopening in 2017 with its original ornate moldings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown. Inside, you'll find evidence of ongoing reinvention. The Vanity Fair Ballroom and Consort Bar have been reimagined for the 21st century, while still respecting their historical roots. And just like the city around it, this hotel has hosted generations of change. From classical concerts to jazz, prohibition to red carpets, and royalty to rock stars. It's also played a role in preserving architectural history, rather than demolishing it, something that connects it to our tour's reoccurring theme. It was in danger of being demolished in the 70s, but received its heritage status in 1973. Over the years, this hotel has been a magnet for celebrity and scandal alike. The Beatles, Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, Ernest Hemingway, and even John Lennon and Yoko Ono all passed through these doors. In fact, Lennon and Yoko stayed here just before their famous bed-in for peace. Despite the city's changing tastes and priorities, this hotel has always adapted without losing its soul, a living example of how history can coexist with modernity, and how architectural grandeur can evolve rather than be erased. It's a reminder that the places we build and preserve help shape our city's story, and when done with care, they remain relevant for generations. Now, as we step away from the refined elegance of the King Edward, we're heading toward a very different kind of space, one that blends playfulness, public art, and clever urban design. Welcome to the most wholesome stop on our tour, Birksey Park. This charming little park is named after William Birksey, one of Toronto's earliest city builders and visionaries. The park first opened in 1982, but what you see around you now is the result of a bold redesign in 2017 by the late landscape architect Claude Cormier, a man who knew how to bring joy into the urban experience. This fountain features 27 dog statues, each modeled after a different breed to reflect Toronto's incredible diversity. All of them are gazing upward toward that golden bone at the top, which represents the opportunity and promise that Toronto offers. And of course, for every 27 dog lovers, there's always that adamant cat lover, which is why a very brave cat sits at the edge of the fountain also. The golden retriever is named Smiley, the only dog in the fountain officially named by Cormier's team. Named after a blind therapy dog who brought comfort and companionship to patients as part of the St. John's Ambulance Therapy Program, this pup is a real Toronto hero. The revitalization of this space has quite literally created a community. In the winter, the Friends of Birksey Park organization knit little scarves for the dogs to wear. And in 2020, the pups were all fitted with custom face masks to encourage safe pandemic practices. This is the kind of public art that meets the moment. So why does this place matter on a tour about revitalization? Because this is infrastructure too. This public space that makes a statement that cities aren't just for working, building, or living in. They're for connecting, laughing, playing, and remembering. Birksey Park is a perfect example of how creative design can transform a corner of downtown into a beloved gathering space. Claude Cormier said, "We are embracing history, we are using history, we are activating history. We are using it not as a decoration, but as an active part of the design, something alive and that can be worked out with today's technology and the current know-how of building city life." He was an architect that really understood what we are talking about here today. As we've seen throughout this tour, revitalization isn't just about restoring what once was. It's about reimagining our shared spaces to better reflect who we are and what we value today. Parks like this, once overlooked, now stand as a joyful, inclusive expression of civic life. They remind us that infrastructure is not only made of concrete and steel, but of memory, creativity, and care. In reframing our city's infrastructure, we're telling a new story, one where sustainability, accessibility, playfulness, and diversity are not afterthoughts, but foundations. Birksey Park captures that spirit with a wink and a wag, and it's in these gestures that we see how public design can foster connection, delight, and a strong sense of place. As we continue our tour, keep this in mind. Revitalization is as much about re-enchanting our everyday surroundings as it is about reworking the city's physical framework. Now, if the back of this building is making you do a double take, you're not alone. This clever illusion, painted by Canadian artist Derek Michael Besant in 1980, is called the Flatiron Mural. This is a great example of what's known as trompe-l'œil, a French phrase meaning deceive the eye. The mural creates a visual trick, making the flat wall appear textured and architectural, with more depth and dimension than it really has. The significance of this piece, besides its unique beauty, is that it was the first ever government-commissioned public art in Toronto. Today, just 44 years later, Toronto's financial district, just a short walk west, now holds the highest concentration of public art in all of Canada, and it all started with this wall. When making this piece, Besant drew inspiration from Toronto's preserved architecture, most notably the building across the street. You might recognize the layout of the windows on the building that is currently a Winners. Besant recognized the importance of the building he was creating the painting for, and wanted to honor it in some way. Besant said, "If I somehow allowed the original wall to exist and be acknowledged, there would be a reference back to what it was." So he didn't try to erase the past. Instead, he layered new meaning on top of it. This is a perfect snapshot of what our tour is all about. Reframing existing infrastructure to reflect changing values. What was once a plain black wall of a Victorian building is now a city-defining artwork, commissioned to add beauty and imagination to the everyday urban environment. Next, we head around the corner to another installation. So tucked away, it is missed by many tourists and locals alike, but marks something fundamental in Toronto's history. You're standing at one of the most quietly profound places on our route today, a spot that tells a big story, though it might not look like it at first glance. What you're looking at here is the Shoreline Commemorative, unveiled in December 2014 and designed by Toronto architect Paul Raff. This elegant piece of public art marks something incredibly important to the history and transformation of Toronto, the original shoreline of Lake Ontario, before we quite literally began reshaping the land itself. If you were standing here prior to the year 1850, you'd be ankle-deep in lake water, as this was the original shoreline of Lake Ontario. But starting in the mid-19th century, Toronto launched what we might generously call an ambitious infrastructure project. The official name? Not exactly. The actual method? Well, let's just say the technical term was dump your garbage in the lake. Everything from household waste to factory byproducts, even dead horses, were encouraged to fill in the lake by creating space for industry. The city was booming, and placing manufacturing right on the shoreline made solid economic sense. Easy to receive raw materials by ship, and just as easy to ship finished goods back out. But here's the kicker. The lake was also our main source of drinking water. You can imagine how well that went. Everyone got sick. Cholera outbreaks swept the city. But not everyone, actually. Any guesses who stayed miraculously healthy during this time? If you guessed the alcoholics, then you would be correct. Because alcohol is distilled, and that distillation process purifies the water. So if you were drinking spirits instead of lake water, you were golden. This sculpture is rich with symbolism. The base is limestone, chosen to reflect the historical topography of Toronto's edge. It grounds the piece in the city's geologic past. And then there's that glowing orb above, perched on a bronze tripod. It represents the horizon over water, but it also evokes the old surveyor's tools used in mapping early Toronto, a reminder that every great city is shaped by how we chart and rechart its limits. After the Second World War, the industrial hold on the waterfront began to fade. People didn't want to live next to factories anymore, and cities around the world started to rethink how they used their shorelines. In Toronto, that change took root in the 1970s with what was known as the Harbourfront Project. Slowly, the old industrial zones gave way to parks, art venues, and eventually sleek condo towers. This very spot, for instance, was part of a larger redevelopment effort. The Shoreline Commemorative was commissioned by Concert Properties as part of the Berksey Condo Project. It's a quiet but powerful nod to the fact that our city has stopped treating the waterfront like the back door and started treating it like our front porch. Today, the waterfront is a destination. People come here to walk, bike, kayak, eat, and connect. What was once a dumping ground has become a public commons. That shift from industry to ecology, from exclusion to inclusion, is what this tour is all about. The values that shape a city are never static, and the land beneath our feet is living proof. From this quiet marker of where the lake once met the land, we now head to our final stop, the St. Lawrence Market. It's a fitting place to end our tour, where Toronto's layered past comes alive through food, architecture, and everyday civic life. Let's head over and see how the Shoreline's legacy continued to shape the city. Here we are at one of the most iconic places in Toronto, the St. Lawrence Market. This place is layered with over 2 centuries of history, reinvention, and near demolition. And right here is where Toronto's very first City Hall once stood. If you look closely at the grey brick facade with the arches on the front of the building, that is actually the remnants of Toronto's original City Hall, used from 1845 to 1899. That building was quite the multitasker. The top floors housed council chambers, the middle held the police station, and the basement was a jail. You could essentially get elected, arrested, and incarcerated all in one building. And here's a fun architectural Easter egg. Next time you're inside the market, look up. The council chamber windows, once offering sweeping views of Lake Ontario and the harbourfront, are still visible. But over time, as the city's shoreline pushed further south and buildings rose around them, those windows now overlook stalls of produce, pastries, and pea-meal bacon sandwiches. As we look across the street to the north side of Front, that's where the first St. Lawrence Farmers Market began, way back in 1803 in a simple wooden shed. By 1830, it was upgraded to a sturdier brick structure. But then came the Great Fire of 1849. The fire started just a few blocks west of here, near King and Jarvis, and quickly tore through the wooden buildings of early Toronto. It devastated much of the downtown core, including the original North Market. The fire destroyed 11 acres of the city and left thousands homeless. It was a turning point for Toronto, not just in how we built, but in how we planned. Out of that devastation came new civic ambitions. Just 2 years later, in 1851, the St. Lawrence Hall was built up on King Street. While often mistaken for an early city hall, it was actually constructed as a public meeting hall, a place for concerts, speeches, and civic gatherings. It still stands as a proud symbol of resilience, built in the spirit of renewal after the fire. Fast forward to the turn of the 20th century, Toronto had boomed to over 200,000 people, the current population of one condo tower today. And the government needed more space. So City Hall moved to the brand new building at Bay and Queen, what we now call Old City Hall, and the existing council chambers here were partially preserved. The floor was raised and the site was repurposed as a larger, more permanent market building, which opened in 1902. Just 2 years later, in 1904, a new North Market was built to house the bustling Saturday Market. A canopy once connected the two buildings, but was removed in the 1950s. Incredibly, in the 1970s, this whole market complex was nearly demolished. It had fallen into disrepair and it wasn't up to fire code. But Torontonians weren't ready to say goodbye. In 1972, a massive revitalization effort kicked off, spearheaded by people who believed that the market's spirit and structure was worth saving. In 2012, National Geographic even named this one of the top 10 markets in the world. and the evolution didn't stop there. This year, on April 5th, the brand new North Market building opened its doors once again. I haven't had a chance to check it out yet, but according to Instagram, it's a pretty happening place to be on a Saturday. So if you get a chance, definitely go take a peek. Together, the South and North Market buildings tell a powerful story of destruction and rebirth, of civic memory and everyday life. Like other stops on our tour, the St. Lawrence Market is a fusion of old and new, where heritage architecture meets public space and where the past continues to feed the present, often quite literally. So as we stand here at St. Lawrence Market, surrounded by layers of history, commerce, and community life, take a moment to consider what this space represents. From the ashes of the Great Fire of 1849 to the near demolition threats of the 1970s, this place has endured not because it was frozen in time, but because it adapted. This is a place where civic life is conducted through shared experience, food culture, and conversation. It's a perfect example of how we reframe infrastructure to reflect new values, access, sustainability, local economy, and a deeper connection to our heritage. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Toronto's layers of transformation. I hope you leave inspired by the power of architecture, design, and community to reshape the places that we call home.